Welcome to the Check Your Art podcast, a place where we discuss the intersection of faith and creativity.
Join us each week as we explore new ways to use our gifts to glorify God and inspire others.
Welcome back to the Check Your Art podcast. It's your favorite podcast starring us. Me, I'm Megan.
Yep, and I'm Jasmine. And we're not lying to you.
No, we're telling the truth.
Yes.
And I said starring, but the real star here is Jesus.
Am I right?
So true.
How true, bestie.
So true. But we're really excited because today we're going to be talking about boundaries. Boundaries serving the church and some other stuff. We're going to talk about setting boundaries and what that looks like. But before we get into that, Megan, what are you up to?
I'm so glad you asked. I am have started my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And now I do a lot of video editing, which is fun. And I'm learning a lot through it, which is cool. But yeah, so started my YouTube channel, have 2 videos up already. Very excited about it. They both are therapeutic art exercises that I've done in the past, but I like them because I like them so much. So I wanted to put them first on my YouTube channel because they are very helpful, I think. So that's kind of the middle of what I'm working on. I'm trying to go back into being more active on social media. I posted a reel yesterday for the first time in 2 months. Wow.
That's big.
It's big. Yeah, so it's good. That's currently, I think, the biggest kind of creative endeavor that I'm in the middle of.
Yeah.
How about you? What are you working on?
I'm not working on anything.
That's okay.
Yeah, I have a lot of stuff on pause because I've been really stretched thin. I'm sick, obviously, or I was sick. I'm recovering. I lost my voice part of last week, so I sound pretty bad, and I will probably cough, so apologies in advance to those listening and for Megan, who may have to cut around it. But I've put a lot on pause with stuff in my car and having to deal with insurance and the police department. I've just been like, what if I didn't have to do anything else? Plus, work is super busy. So I was like, I'm just going to table everything and wait for God to kind of sort this out.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
I would probably feel the same.
Yeah.
Also, you don't sound that bad.
Oh, good.
Yeah, to me. Maybe to everyone else.
Yeah. Let me know.
Drop it in the comments.
Is this painful to listen to?
Yeah. Sweet.
Perfect. So this is a topic that you were really wanting to get into today, and I support that fully, obviously, as I am present.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of start us off and tell us what we're getting into?
Sure. Yeah. So when it comes to boundaries in general, but especially when you are creative and serving with that creative gift in the church, I think it's really important to set good and healthy boundaries so that you don't get burned out and so that the church, like the staff members or whoever is kind of relying on your job to get finished, so that they don't get disappointed and angry or bitter maybe. Because it's also easy, speaking from experience, for me to feel bitter towards either feeling overworked or towards myself because I'm not meeting my own expectations of this because I'm just creatively burned out and can't do anything. So we're talking about boundaries, and then also when does a church kind of justify paying creatives even if they are part of the congregation and members, or maybe outside of the congregation. So when does that kind of come in, and what's the line that, at least that I've experienced and seen compared to, other things. So we're also going to talk a little, super briefly about kind of the contrast of serving with a cheerful heart and doing so gladly, and how serving is good and it's what we're called to do, but also setting up those important, healthy boundaries that we don't overstep so that we can continue serving with a cheerful and glad heart. So the first thing that I wanted to kind of state with serving was, there were 2 verses that came to mind, which was Luke 6, verse 38. And it says, "Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you." So just kind of saying what you give, you will receive back in some way, shape, or form. I mean, think of like tithing. You know, when you tithe a certain amount, you usually get something. It doesn't have to be monetary. You usually get some kind of reward back, whether it's practicing, like growing in a fruit of the Spirit, or someone pays for your lunch multiple times in a row. Sometimes it is monetary. And so similar with creative giving, freely serving with your gift, whether it's singing or painting or graphic design, or honestly just creative back work, like production, audio things. That's a whole art that I don't understand, but it's so necessary. And so then another scripture along with serving is 2 Corinthians 2, verse 9, which says, "Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver." So just kind of reiterating the point of giving with a glad heart. And when you start, and this is what we'll kind of get into, but when you start feeling bitter, reluctant, angry about serving, that means that there might be an overstepping of boundaries, or it might be that you need your attitude and heart to get realigned with God's. It's very possible that's both. So totally valid if that's where you're at, either of those. But before we move on, do you have more thoughts on serving in the church and whatnot?
I think that it warrants a very good discussion because there are different levels and approaches. Like, you are not on church staff, but you do volunteer your time and talent for the church. I was on church staff, but it was a creative position. I'm not saying that like being a pastor isn't equally as hard. It's probably more difficult. But there's like, music is my hobby, but then it's also my job, or it was. And so there are different rules to boundaries because I'm, supposed to be doing this, whereas it's a volunteer thing for you. And so for me, it doesn't feel like serving because at the end of the week, I get a paycheck.
Yeah.
And so I will have probably a little more grace for when I'm annoyed, or I would need to have it, as opposed to someone who'd be like, "Listen, I'm not doing this anymore," And I think, like, as we go forward, the distinction of our points of view will be very necessary because I'm going to be speaking from, I do volunteer in worship, but for the sake of the conversation, from a place of church staff and boundaries.
Yeah.
And then you from volunteer boundaries.
And I think that would be helpful because I'm sure everyone listening has been in at least one of those positions. So yeah, that'll be very helpful. So yeah, when it comes to boundaries, another thing that came in mind was being able to communicate them well with love and also truth, grace, all the good things. And so this verse in Colossians 4:6, it says, "Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person." And I think that's a really helpful thing to keep in mind when you're communicating boundaries and when you're communicating what you need and what you don't need, and what you can and can't do, what should and shouldn't be expected of you when it comes to volunteering. And because I think I've mentioned before, I serve at church on like the graphic design type team.
Yeah.
And so I'll help make sermon graphics, or I'll help make brochures or something along those lines. And most of the time they're pretty simple, pretty like straightforward, and I'm able to do it within a certain amount of time frame, and it's not a problem. But when I'm assigned like 3 things in a month, that's a little too much. And I think now we've gotten to the point where there's a lot of us, and so we have more work to be spread out amongst everyone. Whereas before it felt like I was getting assigned things twice a month.
Yeah.
It felt like a little too much. Um, thankful. So I never actually had to have this boundary setting conversation only because it got better without me having to say it, which is rare. So we are still going to talk about what you should bring up in conversations like that and why it's important to communicate that. I think over communication is almost always going to be your best friend in situations like that, because you could be on one page and someone else could be on a totally different page. And if you're operating in this different page perspective, then it's not going to work and someone's going to be upset, if not both of you. So yeah, I think when having conversations about communicating your boundaries, it's important to kind of tell the person how many hours per week maybe you're willing to commit to something. So for me, typically a task will take about 2 to 4 hours, depending on the level of detail and also depending on the level of how much back and forth I need to do with asking the person questions. Because sometimes I'll get the design brief with the instructions on like what the elements they want in it, but it's very bare bones and not detailed enough. So I have to go back and say, what do you want actually? Like, what do you mean by this? Or is this what you mean by you want this text like added in?
Yeah.
So, so I say 2 to 4 hours, and that's on the easier side of tasks. If it's like a bigger project that maybe there's several graphics or posters that are being put in the church that I'm drawing, or that they're going to be bigger, so they're going to be and they're also going to be hanging up for longer. That is going to be a much larger commitment that maybe you should consider asking getting paid for. Like my husband did 6 posters or something. They were huge, and they were like 16 by 20 at least, if not bigger, and they were all hand drawn, and they took a long time, and he got paid for it because they knew, thankfully the church staff knew that this was a big ask. It's not like a easy sermon graphic that's going to be displayed for a few weeks. It's something that's going to be in the church for a long time, and it's art and it's hand drawn. So they paid him for that. So I think things like big and small tasks are good to have those kind of conversations on how much you can commit, how much you can't.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think anything else, anything extracurricular like that, I think automatically you have to consider what paying someone would look like. For me, outside of Sunday, I definitely get paid if we like do a special event and they're like, this is outside your regular hours, but we would like to have worship. So I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to clock in. And I think that definitely correlates to a volunteer perspective as well. Because there have been, I was at the local seminary. I did my residency on campus in partnership with our local church. But if they were ever asking me to do something outside of what I would normally do as a resident, there would be a paycheck. Especially if it required like hours and hours outside of when I would normally be there. And again, thankfully, I didn't have to ask. It was really fair compensation. But I have to keep that in mind as like a worship director. If I'm going to ask you to show up, I need to compensate you somehow. I will always be like, hey, we're asking this person to do a lot more. We need to see what we could do as far as like paying them some money. Because volunteering to me is Sunday. I am asking you to practice during the week, and I'm asking you to be at church for like 5 hours. And that's a time commitment, and it's really big. And if I'm then asking you, hey, I need someone to do this during the week, I would like to float you like $50, and dinner.
Yeah.
So as far as like that goes, like being paid and like the time commitment, I'm a big advocate of please pay your artists. because exposure is not pay. Money is pay.
Money is pay.
Yeah.
What's that commercial that with a gum that was like,
Oh, being paid in stride gum.
yeah, don't pay your artists in stride gum either.
No, pay them in money.
Cold hard cash. Yeah, and I think that's really important. And I'm thankful that I'm a part of a church that honors arts and artists and knows kind of the limits of our own capacity and knows when we should be getting paid so that we don't have to have these awkward conversations of like, I would like to get paid for this. But if that hasn't been your experience, then I hope that parts of this episode will be helpful to you. And if you have more questions, obviously we are happy to answer them. But there is another kind of metaphor that I like to use when it comes to setting boundaries. And let me pull it up. It just says, so it's when you think about a fence, like a good fence, is low enough to see over, but high enough to offer safety and also offer security. And there's a gate that allows people to go in and out. So if you think of your boundaries like a fence, like a literal fence,
Yeah.
then it's a little more helpful to see, okay, what is past my boundaries, what is overstepping them, and what is coming in that I'm allowing that isn't good for me or for anyone else. And then, yeah, having a healthy visual image of a fence, I think, also will help you kind of reflect what boundaries those need to be. So it would be really good to even write them out if you're struggling and having a hard time setting those boundaries and knowing what is or isn't good for you. I think it'd be good to write them out, talk about them with the Lord, and see where maybe I'm trying to word this in a way that makes sense. See where, kind of like what we were talking about in the beginning, where you maybe just need to have a heart check.
Yeah.
Check your heart, which is the pun of this podcast.
Just in case you didn't know.
Yeah, have a heart check of like, do I just need to have a better attitude about this?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I actually need to set healthy boundaries because they're being overstepped and I'm working too much and I'm tired and burnt out? There's a big difference.
Yeah, I think along with that heart check, it's a thing we've had. It's like, okay, I'm agitated. You called me and asked me to do worship on Thursday night, and I'm agitated. Why? Is it because I'm the only drummer and they just expect me to show up as if I don't have a life? Okay, then maybe you need to have like a discussion about, what needs to happen when they want you to show up. Is it an expectation? Is it like, okay, we can make this work? Or is it, I need to say I'm not available outside of Sunday? Or is it that you just think that you're too good to be doing this and, oh, they need me so much. Why can't they just figure this out by themselves? That is a heart check. That's between you and the Lord.
Yeah.
And also say no. Because you don't need to be leading people if that's your disposition. But I digress. I also think it's really important that people understand what a boundary is, because I think my understanding of boundaries was, I don't like when you do this, so don't do it. But thanks to the magic of the internet, I've been able to like relearn what that looks like, and also therapy, but mostly the internet.
Therapy.
Yeah. That a boundary has consequences. If I'm the only drummer, I've never drummed in my life, by the way. This is just an example. If I'm the only drummer and you ask me every Thursday, can you please come play for the youth ministry? And it starts to agitate me, and it's because you won't seek anyone else out. I have to be like, okay, my boundary is I will play 2 Thursday nights of my choice, okay? But if you ask me to play a third, I'm going to say no. That's the consequence. You're going to get a no. And then you have to actually uphold that boundary. So there can't be any, well, I know I said I was going to. You have to actually say no because, A, if you get suckered into doing it, unless the Lord's like, you have to, which happens so rarely, you're going to feel resentful and you're going to be bitter and you're going to be upset and you're going to start kicking yourself and you're going to be mad at the person who asked you. You have to have a consequence for your boundary. It can't just be, no, I'm going to do 2 nights.
Yeah.
You have to have the consequence. And I think a lot of people miss that part of boundary setting because it's not talked about as much. People are just like, set a boundary. And you're like, okay, I've never done that before.
Now what?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so I, as a staff member, have been like, listen, this is the amount that I can do this week. This is the max of like my hourly. And if I end up going over that hourly, it's on me because I communicated my boundary. And if I felt like, oh, I'm going to do a little bit more, that has to be my responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think the same can be true in volunteering.
Mhm.
I don't think it's that big of a difference when it comes to that.
I agree. And I think the consequence part is really good too, because it not only is something that is a consequence. Well, how am I trying to say this? I'm trying to say that when it's a consequence, when there is a, like, I'm not going to do this, then in your drummer example, they have to find another drummer or they play acoustic worship.
Yep.
That's their only options. And so they don't rely on you. That you aren't their fail safe all the time, because that's unhealthy because you're not being paid to do it.
Yep.
Unless you are, then that's different. But still, yeah, there's kind of a lot of nuance with that. So, all that to say, boundaries are very good. Consequences are also very good when those boundaries get crossed. We're not saying to be angry or to like yell at the person for like asking to overstep your boundaries or overstepping them. We're saying to respond in love and also truth, like some hard truth if necessary. And yeah, I think that it is something that is often overlooked, maybe even taken advantage of when it comes to church serving and volunteering.
I think we're so eager to view everything as service, which like it is to an extent. But when it starts to interfere with the health of your heart and your relationship with the people in your congregation, it's an unhealthy thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's very necessary for church staff to realize as they like put work on their volunteers. I know when I was a worship director, I would ask like, how many weeks do you want to serve? Do you have a preference? And some people would be like, I only want to serve every 3rd Sunday. Some people would be like, I would prefer to only serve once a month, but if you need me, you can ask. And I would, because I needed people. But I was never upset if they were like, no, because, I mean, that's their boundary. They said it. It was clear. But, like, when I was doing worship as a volunteer, I was like, schedule me every Sunday if you want. And they did. But it was great because my worship leader would check in and be like, are you still good with this? I'd be like, yeah, man, I am all in. And so there are different levels. And if you are a staff member or someone who is in a position to be, what is the word?
Hiring?
If you are managing volunteers, vocabulary. If you're managing volunteers, I would encourage you to A, ask, and then B, always follow up and check in and be like, is this still working? Because some people don't know how to communicate boundaries, or they think it's awkward, but you give them that space to do so, and you learn a lot. Things change, circumstances change. So 2 months, every 2 months, that's 6 times a year. I feel like that's an adequate amount of checking in.
It's a good amount. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would appreciate it if it was that much, you know?
Yeah.
Even if nothing was going wrong,
Yeah.
I would still like a little check-in.
And you would also know that there will be an opportunity to bring this up if something does go wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. Having that space is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Allowing that conversation to happen is really good. So, we're both passionate about this. Clearly, have experienced it on both ends and experienced when it's good and when it's bad. So, again, if you have questions and if you want more insight on whatever your particular situation is, we are happy to help, happy to give any insight or advice if you want that. If you don't want advice, you just want to vent, that's okay too. So yeah, but again, just encouraging you to bring it to the Lord, to process it with Him, and He will tell you what it is that you need to do next, whether it's the heart check, whether it's the conversation about boundaries, whether it's actually implementing boundaries or stepping back to serve or stepping up to serve.
Mm-hmm.
All of that falls under God's category of what to do next.
Yep. It is cultivating peace.
Yes.
So-
That's what I was looking for. We're on it.
And so don't feel shy about communicating boundaries. You are just creating a peaceful environment. You're doing the right thing. You're not wrong or lazy or bad for it. Yeah, just go where the Lord calls you to go.
Yeah.
And we wanna hear you have good experiences with boundaries and volunteering. Any bad experiences? Things you would like to see more in the church? How much more would you like to be paid for your art and volunteer work? That's something we will touch on in another episode, but we want to hear from you. And this has been a great time.
Yes.
We'll probably do it again soon.
Probably.
Yeah.
Have a good time. Eat your Wheaties.
You love it.
I love it so much. That was fun. Let's do it again sometime.
If you like watching podcasts, we're on YouTube. If you're more of a listener, we're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and elsewhere in the internet ether.
Follow us on Instagram and TikTok, where we share shorter clips and fun little bloopers.
Okay, bye.